Good evening, dear friends. Thank you for joining me on this evening of the first Sunday in Advent 2020. I just want to say something about the little note I sent out about reading a chapter from the Gospel of Luke each day from December 1st through December 24th. It's an idea that a Lutheran friend of mine shared, and it sounded like a good preparation for Christmas. And my idea is that simply anyone, wherever you are, can sit down with your Bible and read December 1st, chapter 1, December 2nd, chapter 2, December 3rd, and so on. On Christmas Eve, you would be reading the last chapter, the chapter about the resurrection, and then we would go into the Christmas Eve celebrations, perhaps with a different insight into the whole story of Jesus of Nazareth as told by Luke. I will here each evening, 6 p.m. Central Time, read one chapter each day. It will simply be a reading, not a lesson or a class or a discussion. It would be an opportunity for those who simply like to listen to someone read a particular text to do that. And if you wish to do that in your own environment, and because those of you who are listening in from many different time zones, from way over in New Zealand where the day starts until out on the west coast of the United States, and perhaps even farther that I'm not aware of. So please feel free to do that. There would be just a whole, a kind of a band of Luke going around the world. I think we could all contribute something wonderful by doing that. So feel free. There is a tradition which may sound strange to those of you who are not familiar with the Waldorf, the Camp Hill, the Christian community world, of observing on each of the Sundays of Advent one of the prominent kingdoms, so to speak. The mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and then the kingdom of human beings right up to the angels. This too as a preparation for Christmas, and not only looking at the physical side of the mineral and what is all that, but what is the deeper significance. And when I first entered a Waldorf school for the first time, I saw at the entrance a table with all sorts of figures and flowers and nuts, and it was probably fall. So there was a whole lot of stuff that was very beautifully arranged, maybe a couple of dolls that portrayed fairies or nature spirits, and lots of plants, minerals, maybe some animal figures. And then Advent rolled around, and suddenly on this table in the entrance of the Waldorf School in Holland, where my oldest daughter was going to kindergarten, there was almost nothing. A dark blue cloth, a beautiful crystal, something like this, only I think much larger. I'll set it here to keep us company now. A crystal and a candle. That was all. Well, I thought that's what they do here. And that was that way for a week. And then the next Monday, we brought our daughter to school, and there was one single rose standing on the table, a friend from the plant world. And the next week, there was a beautiful, made of filtered wool, a lamb. And the next week, there were, Mary and Joseph-like figures, we thought. Anyway, you get the point. This progresses from the mineral kingdom through the plant kingdom, through the animal kingdom, right up to the human being. And in a way, we celebrate the birth of the human being, foreshadowed in the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, who then takes on the Christ. And like so many traditions, I simply accepted this is the way we do things in the Waldorf school. But the next year, when we wanted to do that at home, we felt in our family, well, we want actually to know why we're doing what we're doing. And so year by year, we looked a little bit more into the realm of minerals and plants and animals and human beings, and tried to spend a little time each Advent thinking a little more deeply about these things. So what I'm sharing this evening is partially the fruit of some very recent research, but also just the practice of living with this progression of the kingdoms through Advent for maybe 35 years or so. And then I want to look at one picture from the New Testament at the end. If we just look it up in an encyclopedia or a scientific encyclopedia, we will discover that a mineral is defined as a crystalline chemical element, such as a diamond or sulfur or gold, or chemical compounds that have a certain structure, a defined structure and a certain composition that is formed by natural geological processes. Of course, you can create crystals, you can create all sorts of things, but basically when we talk about minerals, we're speaking about substances out of the natural world. They're always solid. How tiny they may be, it's still something solid. There is one liquid, however, which I hadn't thought about, and that's mercury, is considered a mineral and is at the same time liquid. Water is, for example, not a mineral, obviously, but when water freezes or condensation freezes on your window, that happens in the winter sometimes, we could discover there also something of these crystalline chemical forms that have formed themselves. There's an important word for the whole process. The whole identity of the mineral is form. The mineral kingdom symbolized perhaps most dramatically in the Apocalypse of John, which of course we've just been working with for the last several months. In several places, there is the so-called sea of glass, crystal clear, in the 4th chapter, and then later, in one of the later chapters. And then, of course, in the 21st chapter, we have all of the semi-precious stones, which appear in the walls of the city of the New Jerusalem. The walls themselves made of jasper, clear as glass, the streets of gold, the city as transparent glass, something like the crystal we just looked at. And we would have to say the mineral is one of the very basic elements of our human body. The fact that we can see each other when we're together, at least in real life, that we can see each other's face and hands and bodies, has to do with the fact that it's a great conglomeration of mineral substance that I'm looking at. I can say there's Craig's face, or there's Susie's face, or John's face and hands and body. And what I'm looking at is a collection of minerals, substance that's been pulled together by the deep inner being of that human being. And there we have something very deep already, I feel, is that the mineral substance that we mostly carry around with us is a substance that we have drawn together, perhaps even before our birth, but as we grow and as our inner being, our I, grows and develops, it pulls that substance it needs to develop itself. We do that through eating and drinking and breathing air and taking in sunshine and moonlight, starlight. All of those elements help to grow the mineral substance in our body so that our ego, our I, has a vehicle, has also something to ram up against and to test itself. You might say, to test its mettle here on the earth. And in the end effect, all of these substances that we have pulled together, this minerality, mineralness that is living as our visible body is also able to attract the cosmic forces, be it the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets. So there is a great back and forth between myself right here, as I sit now in my living room speaking with you, or you who are listening, or the people walking by on the sidewalk. Here on the earth, there is a correspondence and a working together with the forces that are active in the cosmos. And one of the anchors for those cosmic forces we find in the mineral world. We might say, well, the minerals are kind of dead. Like, I keep a little, what's called labradorite. I keep close to me when I'm doing spiritual activity. If you look at it, it looks dead. It's solidified material. And yet the scientists point out that if there were not a certain amount of mobility within this mineral, it would fall apart. It would become dust. We also have to say, within the mineral, there is no consciousness. There is no self-awareness. The mineral is not aware of itself here on the earth. In contrast to you and me and all of those listening and those around us, we are aware. I am aware that I am sitting here speaking with you. I am aware that I have thoughts that I'm allowed to form and to share with those who want to listen. And so, even though the mineral has very little consciousness, or no consciousness in itself, in its earthly embodiment, similar to the plants, but perhaps less detectable, the mineral gives off qualities, not physical qualities. I could rub the labradorite mineral for hours and hours probably, and would never get any of it on my hands or on my face. If I break it open, yes, that's a different step. Then I could release some of the substantiality, some of the qualities, but I would not want to do that by exercising violence. I would want to respect the crystal, the mineral for what it is. It's perhaps easier to imagine with the crystal, which has this beautiful, as we say, crystalline form. We can look through it. I can even see, I can see myself through the crystal. If the sun were shining, it could break the light as a prism. But it's in itself, it's not alive. In there, we might say the cosmic forces that live in the stone are alive, but it's not aware of itself. Many people on the earth are able to pick up the labradorite or the crystal, or here another beautiful example that I once received as a gift. See, it's always falling apart. Oh, that's a leaf. It has these beautiful little sparkling crystals in it. They're not shining on this screen as nicely as they are right here. But this too, we can say, as interesting and as intricate as nature has created this beautiful crystal, mineral, it's not aware of itself. But I, with my hands, with my senses, I can take it in. And the qualities of the cosmic realms that live in the crystal, that live in the labradorite, they can become part of me, and they can be healing or encouraging or stimulating or calming, depending on what I take and what I need. So we could also say that the mineral has a very far-reaching consciousness. It reaches all the way to the stars and the planets and the moon and the sun, only it's not aware of that, a difference between ourselves and the mineral. Our physical body is rarely aware that it is related to the stars and the planets. that takes our own consciousness, our I, our life of feeling, our soul. So you might say that every mineral is in itself a kind of a gateway to cosmic experience, or it can be if we're able to open ourselves to that. So one of the most dramatic examples of this relationship between a cosmic being and the earth, or a human being on the earth, I would say is in the story of the temptation in the desert. It might seem odd to mention this in Advent time, but think of the desert as that place that is the most mineral-like, the most mineral period on the earth. There's very little plant life, no water. Very few animals can exist in the desert. It's sparse, it's stark, it's scarce, dry, hot, and especially hard. It's a very important element in the life of the mineral. Hardness, form. So that, remember, Jesus of Nazareth is around 30 years old, is pulled by a strong inner urge to go to John, his cousin, who has been preaching and baptizing in the Jordan. And he requests the baptism of John. John hesitates at first, but then performs the baptism. The Spirit of Christ descends into the body of Jesus of Nazareth. It is said in the form of a dove. The Holy Spirit is also present. A voice comes out of the heavens saying, "This is my Son." And depending on how you translate, "In him I am well pleased, in him I am revealed. He is born this day." And then Mark says, immediately Jesus was driven into the desert by the Spirit and fasted 40 days and 40 nights. The animals were with him, and the angels tended to him. Mark, chapter 1, verse 12 through 13. Very brief, very powerful, typical Mark, few details. John doesn't tell us the story at all of the temptation in the desert. Matthew and Luke tell the story not until the 4th chapter, and that says something about these two gospel writers that I could expound on for a while. But let's say they go through a longer process describing the earthly development of that Jesus that they describe, each in their own way. And only after a considerable description of the earthly path does this very marked event of the baptism in the Jordan take place with the descent of the Christ into their being. Mark begins almost with that very event. Matthew and Luke need a little bit longer. And they describe, and this is how I often tell the story to the children, is that Jesus is called or driven into the desert. And I like to describe how it gets harder and harder. The path under his feet disappears. It's not well trodden. The stone element has not been finely beaten to pieces by endless amounts of people walking over it, but perhaps he's walking somewhere where no one has walked before, where no other human being has experienced the hardness, the sharpness of the rocks, of the stones, and the dry plant life that exists. No animals, and only a little bit of water trickling out of a cave where he finds shelter. And he lives for 40 days and 40 nights. That's really a long time. It's like 5 weeks, even more, 5 and almost 6 weeks. 6 weeks, yeah, 42 days. 6 weeks. That's like from now until mid-January. No food, only enough water to stay alive. In this hard, dry, hot, unyielding substance of the desert. That's where The first meeting of the cosmic being Christ with the human being Jesus of Nazareth takes place in the mineral world. It's not unimportant to think about in Advent. Some of you may know a magazine called The Sun. And in an article last May, there was a whole article about the desert. And I'd like to close with this quote from The Sun, the issue May 2020, page 35. If any of you have it and want to look it up. What is it about the desert? So many ancient revelations, too many to count, have happened there. An ecologist named Paul Shepard suggests why. And this is a quote from this ecologist. The desert is sensorially austere. In other words, the senses have very little to focus on. The desert is sensorially austere, aesthetically abstract, historically inimical, enemy. The mind is beset by light and grace. The desert sky is encircling, majestic, terrible. To the desert go prophets and hermits. Through deserts go pilgrims and exiles, not to escape, but to find reality. So I wish us all in this first week of Advent that we might lay aside everything that's not essential, perhaps recreate for a few moments each day this desert reality, this wilderness experience, this aloneness, which we all need to come to ourselves. This is the experience that the desert, the world of minerals, could bring us. I wish you a good first week of Advent. I look forward to whoever wants to joining me at 6 p.m. Central Time from the December 1st on to listen to the Gospel of Luke. And I hope to be here next Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Time. I'm sorry about any confusion. That's the time I have to schedule now for a while. 7 p.m. on Sunday evening, Central Time, looking at the second week of Advent, the plant kingdom. Have a good evening.